Hey, Aaron Chambers here. Welcome to episode 35 of Enjoy the Journey with Aaron Chambers. I'm so glad that you are here for this great conversation today. Hey, if you like my podcast, would you give it a thumbs up, give it 5 stars, give it a good review? Would you subscribe? Would you share it with other people? That'd be awesome. I'm trying to put out quality conversations with interesting people. And today I have a fantastic conversation. You're going to be so blessed, especially if you're a leader in the church or in business. We're talking to Dave Ferguson. Dave Ferguson is an award-winning author. He is the founder of the New Thing Network, which is an international church planting movement. He's also the president of the Exponential Conference, church planting conference. He is an incredible thinker, leader, visionary. If you've heard about the multi-site movement, he was one of the founders and early adopters of the multi-site model for churches. This conversation is rich. All right. You're going to want to get a pad of paper, pull out your iPad, your phone, wherever you take notes, because you're going to get so much great content. Plus, we talk about the greatest sport in the world, cross country. All right. Dave and his brother John just put out a new book called Bless. It's an awesome book. And I have a copy right here. 5 Everyday Ways to Love Your Neighbor and Change the World. And so it's a great conversation. And I know it's going to be a blessing to you. And I pray that it helps you to enjoy your journey. All right, guys, I am so excited for you guys to get a chance to be a part of this conversation today. I'm talking to Dave Ferguson. And Dave, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Thanks for having me on, Aaron.
Yeah. So I have admired you from afar for a long time. Been involved with Exponential. Uh, just I've really tried to glean as much as I can from you. I heard you do a workshop at some tiny state convention a long time ago, and you had this dream for something called multi-site, and we'll talk about that in a second. But thank you for joining me. Hey, yeah, tell everybody kind of what you're involved with right now. You wear a lot of different hats.
I have a few different hats. One is I'm the lead pastor at Community Christian Church. It's a church in Chicago, and we have locations throughout the suburbs and in the city. And then I also lead a church planting organization, or really kind of a movement called New Thing. And we have networks now in almost 40 countries. And that would be a fun thing for us to talk about.
Yeah,
And then
that's
I get
awesome.
a chance to lead, I'm the president of the Exponential Conference. And we really kind of help, multiply movement makers. And we're getting a chance to do that, yes, here in the US, but we also have launched Exponential in Europe and Australia. And actually, we're having a conversation about Africa. I don't know if it'll take yet or not, but Africa tomorrow. And then I get a chance to write and speak and do some other fun stuff along the way.
So how do you have time to get done everything God's called you to do?
We are assuming I'm getting it done.
Okay.
I mean, if you were in my lead team, just went on a retreat last week, and basically we probably spent about 45 minutes of them kind of beating up on me, saying, "Hey, you gotta let me know. You gotta let us know what your schedule is, because we want to support you, but sometimes we feel like we don't know exactly what's going on." So it's kind of you to think I'm doing a good job of it. I enjoy almost all of it, and so I think there's some room for improvement as far as communication and kind of trying to make sure I am actually giving the right amount of time to the right things. So
We have a lot of leaders that listen to this podcast. What what are some filters you use to decide what you're going to do and what you're not going to do?
that's a good question. I was fortunate enough a few years ago. A mentor of mine actually paid for me to have a life plan. I don't know if have you ever done one of those things?
No, no.
Okay, so I basically it was like 2 days. This guy comes in from Colorado, takes a look over the past, kind of what they call the sovereign foundations. And then you go through a bunch of kind of tests and different exams and that kind of stuff that he takes you through. And then you kind of try to figure out, okay, where is your energy and your efforts best focused? And really, what is the bullseye on that? And he had my wife, he had Sue come with me because that's part of it. If you talk to Sue, she would say, "Those are 2 days of my life I will never get back." Just talking about Dave.
Yeah.
But it was helpful because it did help me, I think, and I was doing a fairly good job, but it really helped me focus on, okay, what I really want to be focused on is how do I help kind of be a catalyst for multiplying multipliers. And I mean, the community, we're very, we've kind of talked about, we have a multi-site church. Out of that got birthed a church planting network. I also get to lead a church planting conference. A lot of my things I write about had to do with kind of movement making and multiplication. So that's really kind of the bullseye. So when I get asked, if I get asked to speak about something that's, I did a conference not too long ago. It's a topic I'm very interested in. But to be honest with you, the caliber of other people that are in the room, I knew nothing compared to them. I mean, it was like an honor to be there, but once I got there, I was going like, okay, this is not the bullseye. And so I try to stay focused on that.
Okay, so I got to jump in here for a second because you just talked about this idea of multiplying. I listened to a presentation you did a few years ago where you talked about taking an idea and multiplying it times something like 100 or whatever. Okay, and so I sat there and I thought, I just want to give you an honor. At least in our ministry here. So I sat there and I said, we're reaching 1,000 people right now on a weekend. That was a few years ago. Yeah. And I said, I want to reach 1 million people a weekend because I multiplied it, And so out of that, we started a network, multiplying network. And you came and you talked to our network, network of pastors all over the world. We meet every single Wednesday on Zoom. We were doing it before it was cool. And then I said, I want to give away a lot of money as a church. And so I multiplied it. Like you had this, I think you pulled out a napkin or something and you said, take it and multiply it.
I call it a dream napkin.
Dream napkin, yes. And Dave, I took a dream napkin out when it came to our attendance. And so we looked at, what we can do. And we were online already for years and we've been doing things to try to reach 1 million people a weekend. And then I talked about our giving. I'll just tell you the end of the story. Multiplied what we wanted to give times a number. And this past year, man, your legacy here is we were able to give away 2.4 million in,
is that right? That's awesome.
And well, it's cash and resources and it was partnerships and but real money, like $2.4 million of stuff. And so what you're saying, you live and I want to let you know it works. Like it's faith, but it works. It's just because that's the thing. The way you think, Dave, is when you think in terms, because you talk about multiplying.
Yep.
It blows up the paradigm and it blows up all your systems. You have to create new systems. Yeah. So where did this come from? Oh, go ahead, say what you're going to say. But like,
I'll do both things because I mean, first of all, I got to the place where I named it, and you almost said it the exact same way I do. I call it multiplication thinking.
Yeah.
And in Hero Maker, a book I wrote a couple of years ago with Warren Bird, we talk about 5 different practices of a hero maker, which is basically the idea behind a hero maker is a leader that multiplies leaders. And the practice, I think you even said it almost, is multiplication thinking. And for me, maybe what you heard me tell, maybe you might even hear me tell this story, but I was actually in a workshop and Neil Cole?
Yeah.
Okay, so Neil Cole's talking and he says, I want you to take your current dream for your church. And like you, my dream and listen to the way I even say it, my dream for my church was I wanted to have 1,000 people. Cause I thought, maybe I was gifted enough communicator, or maybe I could at least was a good enough organizer. I could get, 10 people in 100 different groups that I could get to 1,000 people. And then he said this, so I want you to take your current dream for your church. And he said, now I want you to multiply it times 1 million. And so I go 1,000 times 1 million, that's 1 billion. And then this is when Neil turned it on me and he said, now I want you to figure out how do you accomplish that dream? And it did exactly, Aaron, you're so right. And I would, it's as simple for everybody listening in. You can do this on the back of a napkin. Take your current dream for whatever your church is. And for maybe some of you are wired kind of like Aaron. So there's a number. Other people, maybe it's a picture, or maybe some other, it's a paragraph or whatever, but take it. And then after you've written it down, then on the back of a napkin, it's that easy, multiply it times even 100. If 1 million or 1 billion's too big, even 100. But what I did and all of a sudden when I had to multiply it times 1 million to go to 1 billion, now I knew that I couldn't teach well enough to attract 1 billion people. And I also knew that whatever I could do, that what in fact, and this is where it pushes you outside of yourself, it was kind of like, okay, I knew that I would have to invest myself in the lives of lots of other people. I knew that I would have to plant lots of churches to get to 1 billion people. I knew that I would have to cross denominational lines and partner with people who maybe have slightly nuanced different views on certain doctrinal things, but we still love Jesus and work together on those kind of things. And all of a sudden, exactly the way you described it blew up my paradigm of what I was trying to do, and the language we use in Hero Maker. It forced me from me being the hero of my story to making other people the hero. And when you do that, all of a sudden it multiplies what you can do. And so I challenge people. I say, if you don't have a dream that makes you dependent on God, you need to get a bigger dream.
Dude, that is awesome.
Well, that's it for me. And I think the stuff, and again, you'll be, I know I'll get an amen from you on this one, because now you look back and you go, what? I mean, it's just how kind God is. I mean, he kind of wants you to grow your faith and take some risks, and that's what faith is. But then he's just like really kind. And all of a sudden, this little conference that we had called Exponential with 200 people, 13 years later, all of a sudden, it's a global kind of deal. Or this first church plant that we did, when we sent some people to Colorado and then California and New York, all of a sudden now there's like 6,000 churches that are a part of it. And you kind of go like, how did it happen? Well, I don't real, you don't, I mean, you look over your shoulder and you make up stuff and go like, oh, well, here's what we did.
Mm-hmm.
And really here's what God did.
Yeah.
But I think at the beginning of it, it's exactly what you identified. It's multiplication thinking. And I'd encourage all your listeners, start there. Start with a dream napkin. What's your current dream? Multiply it, whatever you dare, at least 100. Maybe it's 1,000. Maybe it's 1,000,000. And then figure out what's that dream and how can God accomplish that.
Yeah, that was revolutionary for us, Dave. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because it works. And you get an opportunity. You're having an opportunity. Can you guesstimate how many people you and the Ministry of Community and Exponential and New Thing how many lives are you all touching in a given week? Can you even guesstimate?
That's fine. I mean, truthfully, I've never thought about it.
Because it's all over the world. It's like I watched you were doing a conference, you were doing a leadership, you were connecting with pastors for Exponential, like in Australia or something in the past week. And it's just amazing the lives that God is touching through you and your ministry, man.
And that's the part where, I mean, yeah, I mean, I just feel super grateful because there's some really cool people and you get to help them. And also, I mean, it is, and you end up learning a ton from them.
Yeah.
In some ways, I think it's a sports analogy, so you'll appreciate this. I mean, when I was a kid, my dream was like to play in the NBA. And of course, how tall are you, Aaron?
I'm 6'2".
Yeah, you're 6'2". See, I was supposed to be 6'6".
Who told you that?
I did. I told myself that. Somehow my multiplication thinking didn't work with my height.
Yeah.
But I ended up 5'10". So, I'm not in the NBA. But it's kind of like, I feel like God's just been really kind, because I feel like there's certain people I get to play with in his kingdom that are really just amazing people. And it's a grace. It's a total grace.
You are so humble. And I just want to affirm that you're incredibly humble. You talk about investing in other people. Who invested in you early on that made it just kind of set a trajectory for your life?
A few people come to mind. I mean, one is any kind of this idea of being a hero maker, which is the idea again of my fruit grows on other people's trees. Being a coach, you'll appreciate this. I had a mom, I still have a mom, who, I mean, she was like a really, really good coach. Because I mean, sometimes I say she believed in me. You think someone kind of, as a mom, you think they're kind of gooey and just kind of like, oh, you go get them. No, I mean, like she was like a coach who'd she could poke you in the chest and like, no, you can do this. Go get them. And I think before I ever had the Holy Spirit inside, kind of giving me a confidence about certain things, I think my mom was in there, to be honest with you. So that was one. I'll give you two others real quick. One, again, just kind thing that God, did. You know the name Lyle Schaller?
Yes.
Okay, so Lyle Schaller, for your listeners who don't know who he was, he's no longer around, but he was basically he wrote 50 books, probably, and was involved in editing more than 100, and most all of them were about church life and church growth in the U.S. When we planted our church outside of Chicago, we lived in the exact same town, and he came to our first service. And basically, from the moment we planted that church, if I had any questions about anything, I knew I could find Lyle in the local library, or sometimes he'd just invite me over to his house, and his wife Agnes would make brownies, and we'd sit and talk. And the guy, for those of you who have a business background who know who Peter Drucker was, Peter Drucker was kind of like the father of modern management, just a genius. Lyle Schaller was like the equivalent of that in the church space. And I mean, for him to live in the same town, for me to be friends, and so like we're going to talk about multi-site in a little bit. So we get this opportunity to go multi-site, which I'd never heard of before. I go over to Lyle's house. I'm going like, hey, what do I do? And he just gives me like 5 or 6 things. Here's what you do.
Hmm.
And I mean, I had enough sense. I did them. And it's kind of funny because some of the things that are like common practice now, like when you have multiple locations, you call the person who works in one of the locations a campus pastor, right?
Hmm.
Well, I'm sitting in his living room. He's got books stacked all the way up to each side of his easy chair. And I said, okay, so what do I do if I do start a different location? Because I'd never heard of this before. And he says, well, there's 2 things people want to know when they show up. They want to know who's in charge and who can answer my questions. And I said, what? He said, who's in charge? Who can answer my questions? I said, okay, so I need to make sure there's somebody in charge of that location and somebody can answer my question. And I said, yeah. And he said, and just call him a campus pastor. And I'm like, okay, campus, it's just, and we were one of the first churches did it. And so pretty, and then other people kind of started doing the same kind of thing. So he was one, and I'll give you one more. See if this is the Wayback Machine. You know Carl George?
I've heard the name.
Okay, Carl was a guy who was the head honcho of the Fuller Institute for Church Growth. And when we were first planting our church, he had been to Seoul, South Korea, and studied the largest churches in the history of Christianity. Because by that point in time, there were some churches there that were nearing 1 million people.
Hmm.
And so he came back and he was like, okay, he developed what he called the meta church model. And he wrote a book called Preparing Your Church for the Future. And basically he was saying, here's how we could take what we learned in the East and actually apply it to the West. Now I'm getting ready to plant my church. Okay. I'm like 25.
Okay.
And I am harassing Carl. Hey, can I come to your meta church cluster consultation? And he's like telling me, no, you can't come. I'm like, why can't I come? He said, you can't come because your church isn't big enough. In fact, you have to have a certain size church. In fact, you don't even have a church, so you can't come. Well, I kept bugging him. Finally, he tells me, he says, well, you can come, but you have to sit on the observer's bench.
Okay.
I didn't even know what that meant, but it meant I was in the room. So it was in Cincinnati, Ohio. Before we planted our church, I drive to Cincinnati, Ohio. I sit through this 2 or 3 day deal called the Meta Church Cluster Consultation. The guy who's in charge of Fuller Church Growth School, who'd been to Seoul, South Korea, studied the largest church in the world. How do we do it in the US? He's laying out this whole thing. And I am like feverishly taking notes by, again, just God being nice. Sitting next to me, okay, was a guy named Eddie Gibbs. Eddie Gibbs probably knew more about church growth than anybody in all of Europe. And he happened to be like a visiting professor at Fuller, and he came also just to hear Carl do this presentation for the first time.
Hmm.
So 25-year-old me sitting there hearing Carl explain all this with Eddie Gibbs next to me, basically translating the whole thing, going like, yeah, here's how you could do this, here's how you could do this. And I just took all that back to Chicago. It was like the last thing I heard before I started my church.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've ever read our book Exponential.
Yes, I did.
Okay, so basically what you have in Exponential is probably, 10, 12, 13 years later, what we did with everything we learned from Carl. Because the basic thing was like everybody has an apprentice, you multiply leaders, all the stuff. And so, I mean, again, it's kind of like along the way, there was some really influential people, and God's been very kind to put me in the right place at the right times.
So did people think you were crazy when you started talking about going multi-site?
Um,
Like how did, like, as you start thinking, as you look back and starting to get that vision and how you were going to share it and how, yeah, what kind of pushback did you get? Yeah, what kind of barriers did you have to overcome to get to the place where you actually started a campus?
one of the advantages of being a founding pastor is, kind of like you started it, so it's kind of like you have an unusual amount of, relational collateral.
Hmm.
And in our situation, we actually had two guys who are real estate developers who were in my small group who became believers. So they had no church background. And they had a real estate development group that had 26 properties across the Midwest. And so they become believers in my small group. I get a chance to baptize them. And with almost no church background, they come to me and they're going like, hey, this experience of community that we have in this small group, why couldn't we get this in all the properties that we have across the Midwest? And they were doing it both for spiritual kind of God reasons, but also
Hmm.
business reasons, because they said, I think if our people actually had this level of community in our small groups, it would increase our retention rates as far as um, people renewing um, their leases on apartments.
Yeah.
So I think this could help business and help the kingdom. And I said, I don't know, let's figure it out. So they were the first ones that came to me. And so they actually came to and said, hey, what we decided we'd like, let's figure this out. What if we built, like, I think we ended up spending a couple $1 million on a community center. We'll use it as a community center for our apartments, but we'll also, you can help us design it so it can also function as a church on Sundays and then throughout the week. And so they came to us with that opportunity. And
Mm.
it was almost like a no-brainer. And at that point, we ended up going starting a second location, but we'd never heard of it before then.
Yeah.
It wasn't hard. It wasn't a hard sell at that point.
I gotcha. Yeah. So did you start your church with your brother,
Yeah,
John?
yeah, yeah.
Family, one of the things that I really respect about you, Dave, is family is so important to you. I mean, this book we're going to talk about in a second, which is amazing, by the way, um, you wrote with your brother. And okay, let me back up for a second. You mentioned Sue.
Yeah.
All right. Um, Talk a little bit about your family, like um, your kids, and then I kind of want you to talk about what, knowing that no parent's perfect. What'd you guys do right?
Um, well, the first thing that I mean, probably like all of us when we're in our 20s, I thought Sue was absolutely gorgeous, attractive. So that that was I didn't know that she was going to be a great mom.
Yeah.
And and still is awesome. Um, yeah, there's mistakes we've certainly made along the way. I think um, one of the things, and Sue and I do a workshop called creating a close knit family that lasts.
Okay.
I think one of the things that I think was helpful. Um, so Amy's my oldest,
Okay.
and so when she first started, not in kindergarten, but in first grade, when she started leaving home for a full day, one of the things I started doing with her was we'd have, like, every week we'd have a date, and we'd go out for, gosh, when she was really little, I think we went to Dunkin' Donuts, and then eventually we went started doing Caribou Coffee, because at Caribou Coffee there was this, like, fireplace and a big comfy couch that she liked. And then later on, actually in high school, she worked at Starbucks and she had numbers, so we get a discount. So we started going to Starbucks. But literally, all the way from, like, first grade um, through her senior year in high school. Almost, well, I would say religiously. We had a time where every week we would go out, and and we just and it wasn't like I did a devotional. It wasn't like we had any kind of agenda except just talking about life.
Mm.
And with the boys, I did the same kind of thing, but it was a little easier with the boys because we had sports in common. So I coached their teams all the way up through junior high, and absolutely, absolutely, absolutely love that. And I think you're talking about all the different things. How do you do all those different things? One of the things that like was the first thing that always got put into my calendar were those times with the kids, and also all the kids' games, and coaching. Um, and for me, that wasn't even like a have to. Like now that I mean now they're now all out of the house. We got one that's still in college, but um, I mean I miss that immensely. I absolutely loved every moment of that, and now I mean yeah, we're the family, we're still really close, and I kind of think, I mean, I feel like your your first ministry really is to your family,
Yeah.
because if you if, I mean if you get that, if and again you don't and again I want to let everybody who's listening in, you can do all the right things and your kids still have a choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, but to me, there's no regrets. That if you get that part right, then everything else just is that much better. And yeah, I loved every moment of that, and I'd love to do it again.
So we're going to talk cross country because both you and I have a passion for that sport.
Are you still
So,
coaching?
yeah, I'm still coaching. I coach cross country. We just we're back-to-back state champions.
Oh my
And
gosh, that's awesome.
yeah, we're going for a three-peat. I'm the head track coach and assistant cross country coach.
Is that how many different divisions they have in the state?
Oh, good question. We're 3A.
Okay, so it's a
They're
bigger.
they're adding 6A, but right now there's just 5A.
Awesome.
Yeah, and
That's phenomenal.
well, listen, cross country there's no other sport like it. It's so all three of my kids, my oldest child, I got into cross country after she was out of high school, but the three younger kids all do cross country. And yeah, so I know your son Caleb
Yep.
was especially encouraging.
Both my
What?
boys ran. Yeah, both the boys ran.
We reached out to Caleb though a couple of years ago, and he was incredibly helpful and encouraging to my son Levi, and who's running in college, and my other son Silas is going to run for Milligan next year. But how'd your family get into cross country?
Well, I mean, I mentioned earlier, I played a lot of sports in high school, but basketball was like my favorite.
Okay.
And so when both the guys were little, we played a lot of hoops, in the driveway, and all little Tykes hoop, all this stuff. And so my oldest son, my middle one, Josh, went out for the middle school basketball team, and he didn't make it. And I think it probably broke my heart almost as much as his. And he didn't make it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we're in a suburb in Chicago where, I mean, everything is very, very competitive. And so but before basketball, he had gone out for the cross country team, and it was mostly just to kind of try to stay in shape for basketball tryouts. Well, all of a sudden that didn't work. So, he went and ran track, and he was just okay in in middle school, but he stuck with it, and ended up I mean, one of his teams, like you, won state. They actually went to Nike Nationals. His team did, and I got to go out there with them that year, and I think they got 12th in the country. And then he ended up running at Calvin College, and they went to nationals every year. And then Caleb, who's the younger one, who probably is more naturally athletic than Josh. He made the basketball team. He was one of those kids who kind of like whatever he tried out for, he made it, seemed to excel. And finally, I think it was his sophomore year, after playing basketball and baseball and cross country, finally he kind of said, you know what, I think I need to pick. And he ended up where he could have been on the varsity basketball team, making the choice to run cross country, and did really excel just like his brother. Then went on to Calvin, and he was a two-time All-American there in the steeplechase. And if there's any race that's as fun as a cross-country race, it's the steeplechase. That's craziness. That is just craziness. And for those listeners who don't know what a steeplechase is, basically it's a 3K, so it's almost 2 miles, and you have, I think it's 27 barriers. Did I get the right number?
Yep, I think that's right. Yeah.
And then you also have a water hole, and but the barriers aren't like hurdles, because the hurdle, if you hit it, it goes down. The barrier, if you hit it, you go down. And if you exert too much effort up front, you absolutely pay for it in the end. And so we've had a lot of fun, a lot of fun with them and their success in running cross country and track.
It's a great sport. Yeah, my son Levi does steeple now in college.
Oh, does he?
And yeah, he does. Yeah. And it's and here's the thing, he was going to play basketball. Like he was just like his dad was going to play basketball. And he comes to me and he said, "Dad, I could be an okay basketball player or a really good runner." And he was right. And then Silas was going to be our football player because that was one of our dreams, to go to football games on Friday nights. And his brother got into cross country and he drank the Kool-Aid and he was, he was all in. But there,
So give me some of the, so like what's your kid's PR in the steeplechase?
I don't know. I should know that. I don't know. Dave,
In your state, do you guys run a 5K for the state champs, or do you do a 3 mile?
we do a 5K.
Okay, in Illinois they do a 3 mile.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean for cross country?
Yeah, for a cross country.
Yeah, we do 5K. Yeah, it's a great sport. I will tell you, I've been coaching for 7 years, and countless trips, not one disciplinary problem. They work year round. That's the thing. Cross country trains year round. We're in winter training right now, and goes right in the track. And then they get off 2 weeks at Christmas time, and 1 other week between track and cross country season, and that's it. It's just,
And there are so many brilliant metaphors for life, I think, in cross country too. I mean, the really good teams understand how to run in a pack and what that means, and how, and most people, to a casual observer, okay, if you've never watched cross country before, I'm sure you've talked about this on your podcast before, but the really good teams, they don't run for themselves. You're running for the other guys. And it's the camaraderie. It's really the love that you have for the other people in your team that forces you to do things you never ever could do. And I think it's a brilliant sport, because I think it helps you helps you train for a lot of other things in life you're going to go through.
yeah. What Dave just said is, you don't. I really want you to understand that, because Dave, you said something earlier. You said community leads to retention, and community leads to retention, which leads to success. And first of all, cross country, to dive into this a little bit deeper, community. It's all about community. They're a family, and we don't. And retention, like once they're in, we call it drinking the Kool-Aid and joining the cult. Once you're in, you're in. And it's like they fight for each other. They have each other's backs, and it builds success. But what he just said was so right. Cross country is not an individual sport. It's a team sport. It's all about pack time. You need your athletes to finish as close together as possible, which, Dave, as I think about it, that's an underlying theme of what you've been preaching for decades. Is community leads to retention, leads to success. And let's multiply that, because that's what those guys were saying. Those realtors in your small group were saying, I want to reproduce this community we have, because we have each other's back and we're experiencing spiritual success. And I want to, the other kinds of success can happen as well. But those are lessons that I've learned from coaching cross country and being involved in that sport.
I look back at this last year. I mean, we closed our physical doors to all our physical facilities the weekend of March 12th, and we still haven't opened up. We'll open up again February 28th.
Okay.
And we were talking about it with part of our lead team today. The thing I think that got us through as a whole church this last year was our small groups, that connection, that the connection that people had, the love they have for you, the community they experienced there. That's what got them through what we were going through. And I think it's what got our church through it in a remarkable kind of way. And I mean, let's go theology a little bit. I mean, if you go all the way back to the beginning of time, what existed before there was anything was God, Elohim, right? Which is the plural word for God. I'm not telling you anything, but maybe your listeners know. God's name in the beginning was Elohim. It's a plural word. So God actually existed in community before there was anything. And what did he create out of that? He created Adam and Eve. He wanted to live in community. And then
Hmm.
when he finally got fed up with what was going on in the world, he sent Jesus to establish the church, this eternal community, the only thing that's going to live forever. And so I think some of the things that happened, even we'll go back to cross country, that happened in cross country, this experience of community is a glimpse, okay, a glimpse, and it may not have Jesus at it yet, but it's a glimpse, I think, for those kids of how God meant for us all to live.
We won state this year because our number 5 was pushed by our number 6. We had to run because of COVID. They divided us up into groups of 25. That's it,
Oh, wow.
25 per flight.
Okay.
So one of our fastest guys got bumped down to the second flight, which he was very discouraged about. But he and another guy, they fought, they pushed each other, and because they pushed each other, one of those guys was our number 5 and sealed state for us. And there's so many metaphors in what you're saying, theologically, community. So many incredible things happen when we live together, when we push each other, when we and then think about your book, like this idea of loving your neighbor and changing the world, like just the power of relationships, one-on-one relationships to make a big impact what I just said was state, the power of those two guys in a slower heat fighting and finishing way ahead of everybody else, but guaranteeing state for us. That's the power of these relationships and community. It leads to the victories that we all want to experience.
Yeah. Well said.
Okay, so you wrote this book with your brother. I want to talk about it. It's blessed. It means you begin with prayer. The L's for listen. E is for eat. The first S is for serve, and the last S is for story. It's a great acronym. So tell me a story behind why you guys wrote this book.
I mean, part of it was a solution for a problem that I faced personally, but also part of it was a solution for a problem our church faced corporately. Personally, I remember when I first became a Christ follower. I mean, as someone, if you've experienced the love of God and the grace of God, I mean, and you got the real thing, you've drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to share it. You want other people in on it, right? And I think in my well-intentioned, but in my energy, I thought the only way I could do it was by, hey, just being a witness and telling them my story and presenting the gospel. And what happened as a result of doing that, sometimes with complete strangers, was I ended up, I think, with a lot of relationally awkward conversations, sometimes alienating people, I'm answering questions that people aren't asking, all kinds of stuff like that. So I first of all kind of went that direction, kind of like, okay, I gotta tell them, right, using my words. And then I think I swung the other way. I was like, okay, you know what? That's not working because people aren't saying yes to Jesus. They're not experiencing God's love. So I said, well, I'm just gonna kind of live the life. People will be able to tell by how I live my life. And I think what really happened is people thought I was a good guy, but again, they never really came to know the love of God or decided to follow Jesus. Well, we saw the same thing happening with a lot of people in our church too. And what we wanted to do, while we wanted to see every person engaged in the mission, there were a couple other things. One pivotal thing that happened was I got an email from a guy who gave me his doctoral dissertation, and there was buried in this doctoral dissertation, the part that he sent me was titled Blessers versus Converters.
Okay.
Blessers versus Converters. And they did a study. They did a study of 2 teams that they sent to Thailand as missionaries. One team went as the blessers, and their goal was, hey, we're just going to bless whoever God puts into our path. The other team went as converters. They were going to win souls. They were going to change people. They were going to convert people. After 2 years of observing both of them, what they observed was this: was that first of all, the converters, there was basically no difference in the community because of their presence. And the second thing that they discovered was after 2 years that there were 2 people who actually became Christians and said yes to following Jesus and understood God's love. That was the converters. The blessers, on the other hand, after 2 years, they were able to observe there was a tremendous amount of social capital that they created. It was just like they made a difference. It was a better place to live because they were there. But then the second thing that they observed was they saw 100 people say yes to Jesus. So it was like a 50-1, the blessers versus converters. And so as I'm reading that, I'm going like, wow, it's like God's strategy all the way from Genesis. He said to Abraham, I'm going to bless you, and then you're going to be a blessing. His strategy for changing the world was a blessing strategy. And that's when we began to look at the life of Jesus. And if you look at the life of Jesus, I mean, what you do see some practices there that are weaved kind of like throughout his life that really were just about blessing people. Having observed those and reading those, we took them then and said, okay, how do we make this in a really memorable way that people can do the things that Jesus did, to love their neighbors, and maybe in time even change the world? And that's where we were able to actually, and we lay this out in the book, where whether it's the B is begin with prayer, or L listen, or E eat, or S serve, or the last S story, share your story. Those were all things that Jesus did. And it wasn't, this is the part that I think is super helpful, it wasn't something that he added to his life. It wasn't a program that he went through. It was just how he lived his life. It really came out of his life. And we began to do that ourselves, and we began to see how it really did. It really did. If you do them in that order, it actually, you earn kind of the relational credibility after you've prayed for somebody, really built a friendship by listening to them, have them over to your house or out to eat, or even for a Starbucks, and then you get to know them. They will tell you how you can serve them. And then at some point you'll get a chance to share your story. And if you share your story then, instead of like I did early on, just kind of like showing up and, hey, here's what you need to know. Here's my testimony. I'm witnessing. At that point, if you've earned all that relational credibility, it means something to them, and they really do lean in. And we've really seen it work in amazing ways over the last 8 or 9 years at Community. The Evangelical Covenant denomination has now adopted it as its national evangelism strategy. It's getting, I had a guy from Brazil who runs a large church planting conference there. They want to introduce it there next year. I don't know how it'll do in Portuguese, but they're interested.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's kind of the background of why we wrote the Blessed Book.
Which one of those requires more effort from you? Like which one you have to kind of like, oh, I gotta work on this just a little bit more. Like it doesn't come as natural. Is there any one of those that doesn't come as natural to you?
I think the one that I wouldn't say it doesn't come, well, yeah, maybe it doesn't come natural. I think the E, as much fun as that is, because once we do it, I love it. But it has to be on purpose. And as you can imagine, I mean, I go at a pretty quick pace. And so if I don't do that intentionally, with Charlie and Debbie next door, then it won't happen. So I think the praying for people, that's just something I do in my journal. So I got 8 folks that live in my neighborhood or in close proximity I'm praying for on a consistent basis. When I see them, I'm enough of an extrovert. The listening part comes pretty natural. The serving, I think once I know there's something that they need, that feels pretty good. But I think the E part is the one I have to be, even as much fun as it is, I have to be intentional about that, or it might not happen.
Okay. So you're talking about churches starting to pick this up, which is very, very exciting. If there's a pastor, because we have some pastors to listen to, if there's a pastor listening and they're like, okay, like what would you encourage, how would you encourage them to introduce this to their church?
Oh, that's a great question. Here's the thing. And maybe with your network, if your network is interested in, I could get you guys, because I know you guys write your messages together, which I think is awesome. I could send you our message series that we did, and you guys could take it and make it better. And having said that, though, if there's pastors listening, I would say you're probably going like, wow, last BLESS, this could make a great talk. I could do 5 weeks, right? And it does make a great talk. But I would say don't teach it first. And unfortunately, this doesn't sell as many books whenever I say this, but this is just the best way to do it. The best way to do it, if you really want to transition your church to a kind of a missional culture where everybody's doing these blessed practices, there's 3 phases. Number 1, you need to do it yourself first.
Okay.
So I think for those of you listening, and maybe you think of yourself as primarily a teacher or primarily as a shepherd, or maybe even primarily as a leader. I also want you to think of yourself as a culture creator. You're trying to change the culture of your church. So if you're going to be a culture creator, you have to actually do this yourself. So I would encourage you, you probably need to do this, I mean, 3 to 6 months yourself, where it's okay, no, I'm bought in and I got a few stories to share. And so you do it yourself first. Then after you do it yourself, then next phase 2 out of 3 phases, then you teach it to your leaders and your key influencers. And so if your church is, let's say 100 people, there's probably 20 folks. Think about your top 20%. Now, part of what you may pick up on here, Aaron, that I'm talking about too, if you remember Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point,
Yes.
or the innovation curve, usually the innovation curve, there's kind of the tipping point somewhere around 17 to 20%. So what you want to do then is you want to get, after you do it, you teach it and you introduce it to your key leaders. It might be small group leaders, your student community leaders, your children's leaders, music folks, all those people, and get them doing it. And they need to do it for like 3 to 6 months. After that happens, now you're ready to teach it to the whole church. Because here's what will happen at that point, and I'll tell you what, I'll give you my email if you want to give it to people, and they can, if they want to get our series, they can have it, so they can hold it until they get to this place. Then you teach the whole church, because at that point, when you teach, like, okay, how to bless your neighbor, here's 5 weeks. Then all of your leaders, that 20%, they're all nodding their head. They're saying amen. They're going, oh yeah, because they're going like, oh yeah, this is great stuff. I've been doing this for the last 3 to 6 months. I remember when Aaron taught it to me. Oh, so good. It's really helped me build relationships. And so you already have buy-in. And what happens is that then just takes that innovation curve, and all of a sudden it goes to the tipping point where everybody buys in. So if you want to introduce it and change the culture, phase 1, do it yourself. Phase 2, leaders. And then phase 3, then you teach it to the whole church.
I love you. Okay, I'm just telling you because, dude, because we have business leaders that listen to this as well. And if you're a man or woman who's in business leadership, Dave just told you how to create culture, regardless if it's his book or not. You spend 3 to 6 months ingesting it, going over it, learning it, buying into it, believing in it. Then you share it with key leaders, and then you share it with the rest of the group.
Yep,
that's awesome.
I'll tell you what. I'll give one more thing to your business leaders, because here's the other thing. Here's what you're doing. You're creating culture. 3 more quick pieces, and I'll shut up.
Oh, dude, I'm taking notes. This is great.
Because think about expanding concentric circles. At the center of creating culture is your values. And these are things, and values are the convictions of your head and the passions of your heart. Now, when it comes to these blessed practices, as pastors, we've already bought into the Great Commission. We've already bought in that, yeah, we ought to be prepared to give a witness, all that kind of stuff. So we already have the values in our head, and we're also passionate in our hearts. And so you got those are in place. The second thing after values, then the second expanding concentric circle is what I would call narrative. And narrative has 2 things, and this works business or church. It is language and stories. Language and stories. And so, like with the blessed practice, we're giving them some language here, right? I could tell you a story about my friend Mike, who actually was a guy who we became friends because we were both parents of kids on the cross country team, who I did these blessed practices with him over the course of probably 2 years, and I got the chance to baptize him on Easter. And here's the deal, Aaron. I baptized him not because I was the pastor. I baptized because he was my friend. You know the difference, and other pastors, the difference too. And that was a big deal. And so I can tell that story. When I tell that story, people go like, oh, that's how it works. So if you want to create culture, you hold the values. You also have a narrative, which are language and stories. And then the last one is practices. And that's what's great about Bless. We give you 5 practices. Here's things you do. Okay. And when you want to create culture, I think you do it in those 3 phases, but then you create it that way by giving them values, narrative, and behavior.
This book is so practical. At the end of every chapter, there's questions and studies and resource. It's just, I love how practical this book is. And so I'll give information. We'll have links and everything to how they can order the book and find out information about it. Yeah, hopefully you're taking notes. Like I just drew like this, like these circles. Like this is that's exactly what we're talking about. In the second circle, you mentioned narrative. I was blessed to talk to one of your team members, Don Smith. He works with you on Exponential, and we talked about stories. We talked about stories. What story are you going to tell in the next Exponential gathering?
Oh, what story am I going to tell in the next Exponential gathering?
Because I think it's happening in 20. Because there's things happening now. Because I'm on your website, and there's groups happening now that people can get involved with and join. There's so many opportunities for connection with other leaders and things calls you can listen to. It's just amazing what you guys are putting out. But I think the next gathering is going to be 2022, correct?
The large one that we have, kind of the global one we do in Orlando, it's going to be in the first week of March in 2022. We'll be doing regionals in, I think, we're not doing the normal 10 because it's kind of pared back in 6 major cities in the fall, including Chicago. And we will be doing some roundtables as well. But those are the upcoming things in Exponential as far as in the United States. Our theme for 2022 is going to be empowered. It's all about the power of the Holy Spirit, which I think that's a great question. What story am I going to tell? I think the story that's going to happen, it's going to be a little bit different, and I don't know if this is a good answer or not. We're going to actually ask people to have an experience with the Holy Spirit at Exponential. And the guy, I was telling you a little bit of this before we jumped on, there's a guy named Pete Greig who I've gotten to know, and I'm really excited about getting to know him better, who's coming in from England, who was a part of Holy Trinity Brompton, an Anglican church there, but has written exclusive on prayer and the Holy Spirit. And he's going to guide us in some times where we're really going to ask the Holy Spirit to do some things. And Aaron, I think, know well enough. Like, I'm all for whatever the Holy Spirit wants to do, but it's not like I'm not really in that stream where you wouldn't, for those with a church background, typically think of me as charismatic or Pentecostal. So essentially, he's going to lead some of that. And I got another guy who's also going to lead, and I'm going to kind of be apprenticed in this, like real time. So I think there's probably going to be a story that comes out of it rather than a story I tell beforehand and go like, oh, here's what you want.
One of the things I love about Exponential is you guys are willing to tackle hard subjects. You guys have been leading the way with the race discussions, and I know you've been involved with those even in the past few days. I would encourage people to look you up and just some rich conversations, Dave, you're having. But this whole idea of talking about the Holy Spirit, I'm so excited. I grew up in my tribe, we didn't talk about the Holy Spirit. We knew the Holy Spirit was a part of the Trinity, but we didn't talk about the Holy Spirit. And I'm excited about this. I'm going to be there. It's going to be awesome. And I cannot wait to see what God does through that. Okay, let me wrap up with a couple more things here. I appreciate your time so much. Everybody and their brother who's a leader is being asked, what can churches do? What can businesses do to be ready, for what's next or what we're already experiencing in light of COVID and everything? I want you to speak because you have such a heart for leaders, men and women who are in leadership, whether it be in the church or in business. What is something that men and women in leadership, whether it be church or businesses, what is one thing they have to get right moving forward, looking at the future?
Well, as you were asking that, can I say 2 things and I'll make them brief?
Dude, it's your time. Yeah, please.
I mean, 2 things. One is, okay, you have just been through a really, really, if you're leading a business or a church, a really, really, really hard time. You're in the middle of going through a pandemic, so a health crisis. You've probably also had to lead through a racial reckoning. You've also had to lead through, I know church leaders, huge economic ups and downs. I mean, Barna's talking about 1 church in 5 closing in the next 18 months. So, I mean, it's an overused word, but I'll use it, unprecedented.
Yeah.
So, the truth is, this is the hard truth. The hard truth is it's still going to be hard for a while. Because, I mean, if you're running a restaurant, you're not going to be back at 100% for a while. If you're running a church, the average church right now that's open is seeing 36% of their previous attendance. Yep. Okay. So it's going to be hard for a while. So I think the first thing you need to do is you need to take care of yourself. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. And I'm not saying don't work hard. I'm not saying take long vacations. What I am saying is you need to have a plan for, okay, how am I going to take care of myself physically? How am I taking care of myself spiritually? How am I taking care of myself relationally? And and I got some things that I try to do. I think so. You need to double down on those things because I'm guessing for probably all of 2021 it's going to be hard. And we thought it was just going to be a few months in 2020. So once you do that, the second thing I would say is I think I'd say this both to church leaders and business leaders. You need to really focus on connection. And we've already highlighted this, Aaron, and I think both of us believe in this. Your connection with your customer, or in the church world, the connections you can create for people with one another and with God, that's what's going to get them through this next season. And at a real practical level, I'll just kind of keep it real. If you want to keep people in your church and you also want to keep them giving to that cause financially, focus on connection. Yeah, you continue to do your best you can with outreach and marketing and all that kind of stuff. Business leaders, you need to do that because you don't want to get too far behind. But if you focus on connection, that's what's going to get you through this. And that's what we're doing. And so far it has paid off.
That's rich stuff. All right. Hey, what's one thing that's bringing joy to your journey right now, Dave?
Especially I'd say, okay, at a local level where at Community Christian, I am just, again, so surprised at how faithful God has been at Community. I mean, we're working really hard and trying all kinds of new creative things, which is a blast. But there's some things that have happened that are totally unexplainable outside of just God being really, really good and really, really kind. And my hard work, all my conniving and strategizing didn't make any of that happen. And that makes me feel grateful. I think that brings joy. Just maybe it sounds cliche, but it's just true for me right now, how faithful God's been, especially this last year.
Yep. Awesome. Hey, so I want to make sure if people are listening, I'm holding a book up. If you're on YouTube, you can see it. But if you're listening, the book is Blessed: 5 Everyday Ways to Love Your Neighbor and Change the World. And what's a good place to pick this book up?
Well, I mean, of course,
you have a website, or?
Of course, you can go to Amazon. I'll give you a couple websites though. The landing page is www.bless-book.org, bless-book.org. And if you want to check out other stuff that I've written, or other stuff I'm doing, daveferguson.org. Okay. We briefly touched on Hero Maker. All that stuff is there, daveferguson.org.
Okay, so all the athletes are at the line, cross country state meet. You're the coach, all right? You're talking to a bunch of leaders right now. What do you say to them as they're getting ready to race?
Well, if it's my team, I would tell them this. I'd say, you've done everything you can do to this moment. You are prepared. And you run the first part of this race with your head. Don't forget what I told you. And you run the last part with your heart.
Yeah. What a way to end, man. Thank you so much, Dave Ferguson. Grateful for your time. And you are truly a blessing, and we're grateful. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.